So now it is recording. So good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon from India. Thank you very much for joining us here today. We warmly welcome you all to the first talk in our webinar series with the theme China-India Forum on Climate Policy and Governance. Before we begin the talk, I want to request Professor Subimal Ghosh, who is the current head and convener of our interdisciplinary program in climate studies at IIT Bombay, to kindly begin the session by introducing our program. Over to Professor Subimal Ghosh.
Thank you, Shiba. Good afternoon and good evening to all of you. Welcome you all in the China-India Forum on Climate Policy and Governance, joint seminar series jointly organized by the Chinese University of Hong Kong and the Interdisciplinary Program in Climate Studies of IIT Bombay. The professor, by the speakers from IIT Bombay as well as from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. So before starting the seminar series, just I'd like to give an introduction to our interdisciplinary program in climate studies at IIT Bombay. So ours is a interdisciplinary academic program and the first PhD program on climate change in our country, in India, which was set up in 2012 with the funding from Department of Science and Technology, and after that with institute funding we continued this program. And in our program, it's an interdisciplinary program where we focus on mostly on the scientific understanding of climate science, as well as different policy interventions that can help in climate resilience, technology development, as well as sustainability. And this is one of the very important topic, given the fact that we all know that global warming is increasing at a very high rate. Global warming is taking place at a very high rate, and we are seeing that unprecedented events are becoming more and becoming frequent. And so this is one of the major problems the entire humanity is facing. And given the very high population of both the countries, India and China, probably, both these countries are suffering the more. But at the same time, it is also, we need to remember that if you see the recent analysis and recent data, India and China are the two countries who are actually contributing most significantly in terms of greening of the globe, which is also very important, because vegetation actually sequestrates 30% of the atmospheric carbon dioxide, which is also very important. So these two countries are actually playing a major role in terms of climate change science and climate change policy interventions and so on. So regarding IDP, we have ours is a truly interdisciplinary program, and we have 32 faculty members from 11 different departments. And at this moment, we do not have any core faculty members, but we have now started recruiting the core faculty members in the climate studies. And we always want to make sure that we have around 65 plus PhD students, and which is a good number. And then we make sure that each of the students are co-supervised by faculty members of two different departments, so that the interdisciplinary flavor is there in the PhD topics or in our research findings. And in terms of research, actually IDP is doing quite well. Over the last 8 years, actually we have been publishing good articles in some of the high impact journals like Nature Climate Change, Nature Sustainability, PNAS, Science Advances, Nature Communications, Geophysical Research Letter, and many more. So, and of course, we are also planning to expand IDP in terms of starting the master's program and different other programs and so on. So this is all about IDP. And today, we are very fortunate and we are very happy that our first seminar will be presented by Professor Yuan Xu from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. And I welcome you all again to this seminar series. This is very important seminar series. Thank you. Over to Shiva.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Ghosh, for the very nice introduction. Next, I would request our former convener, Professor D. Parthasarathi, to say a few words about the webinar series.
Yeah. Thank you, Shiba. At the outset, I would like to thank Professor Yuan Xu and his assistant, Ms. Tiffany, for initiating this series and proposing this idea. And then I'd like to thank Ms. Shiba, Professor Raj Ramshankaran, and Mr. Subimal Ghosh, who played a big role in coordinating this activity and ensuring that we have a good start to this webinar series. Professor Yuan Xu visited us a couple of years ago at IIT Bombay and had a very fruitful stay in terms of carrying out some research, establishing collaborations, and giving a very interesting talk on devolution, democracy, and climate change. Professor Subimal Ghosh mentioned that our IDP in climate studies is an interdisciplinary group, but Professor Xu, I think, is interdisciplinary in himself. The background in science and geography and resource management and public policy reflected both in his educational qualifications as well as in his affiliations and the kind of work that he does. So we, myself and Professor Xu, have been having this conversation for several months now. And unfortunately, the pandemic intervened and we couldn't ensure that this series takes off, but we are glad that finally it's happening. So we are all aware that India and China, both very large countries, growing economies, the urgent need to address inequality and poverty, while also addressing the need to expand consumption and production. All of these are challenges that both countries face, and inevitably, the question of energy becomes very important because energy is necessary both to address that people are able to meet their basic consumption needs, but also for ensuring production for jobs and livelihoods. But how to do all of this sustainably is the key problem. And especially when it comes to climate, both India and China have shared concerns while having differences on many other issues. So I was fortunate with a few colleagues from IIT Bombay around 2005 to work with a group of government officials from China, from Brazil, from South Africa, India, and Pakistan. And we played an important role in working with government officials to put up a shared strategy and a shared set of visions in climate negotiations, in international climate negotiations. And we are very happy that from then till today, India and China continue to work together and project a common front when it comes to international climate change related negotiations. And it's particularly important that when it comes to policy, we have these kind of dialogues because the sheer scale of the two countries, the problems related to institutions, governance, devolution, decentralization, the need for critical understanding of policy processes, these are common to both our countries. And so, despite our different political systems, legal regimes, and economic systems, there's a lot that we can learn from each other. China and India's success in addressing climate challenges is crucial for how the world at large is able to mitigate future risks and bring down emissions levels, while also meeting the basic needs of millions of people. So Professor Subimal Ghosh mentioned that the two countries are contributing more to greening, which is an important strategy for addressing climate challenges. And so the lessons learned from our two large countries for adaptation and mitigation are likely to be of great relevance for countries around the world. And it is as part of that shared understanding of what we can do together that we have started this India-China webinar series on climate policy and governance, jointly organized by IIT Bombay and the Chinese University of Hong Kong. So we hope to have at least 2 seminars every semester, one from India and one from China. And so they are starting with this particular webinar by Professor Yuan Xu, and it captures very well the need for interdisciplinary research in this area as it brings together concerns relating to science and policy in one term. So with this, I would like to welcome you all. to this webinar series, and I hope you attend our future talks as well. We're very glad to be hosting this series of talks, and we hope that this will foster greater collaboration between our two countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Parthasarathi. So now I would like to request Professor Raj Ramshankaran, he's the seminar coordinator, to kindly invite our speaker, Professor Yuan Xu, on board today. Over to you, sir.
Yeah,
Raj.
so good afternoon, everyone. So first of all, I'd like to thank Professor Yuan Xu and Professor Parthasarathi for initiating this seminar series. So now I'd like to introduce our speaker today. Professor Yuan Xu is an associate professor in the Department of Geography and Resource Management, and also the leader of the Environmental Policy and Governance Program in the Institute of Environment, Energy and Sustainability in the Chinese University of Hong Kong. So before joining this university in August 2010, he received a PhD degree in public policy in February 2010 from the program in Science, Technology and Environmental Policy at the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs, Princeton University. And he conducted postdoctoral training at the Industrial Performance Center, MIT. He also got an MS degree in climatology in 2004, a BS degree in atmospheric science in 2001, one from the Department of Atmospheric Sciences, and a bachelor's degree in economics from the China Center for Economic Research, all from Peking University in Beijing, China. And he has, to his credits, a lot of research papers in journals as well as in book chapters. So now I welcome, with this brief introduction, I welcome Professor Yuan Xu for delivering his talk on the environmental policy and air pollution in China, governance and strategy. Professor, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all the kind words, introduction, and all the recommendation. Thank you very much for to Professor Ghosh, Professor Partha, and also Professor Ramshankaran. So today's talk is just about a book. Is one of my book just published by Routledge. So it's I'm going to talk about environmental policy and air pollution in China, and especially focus on its governance and strategy. Especially, so this is a book. It's publishing with free access, open access. You can freely download it. You can just Google this this title and you'll find the book. And you can freely download this book if you want to read it. And for today's talk, I'll talk a little bit about the entire background and what kind of questions we're addressing. And then we'll talk about how can I understand China's political will for the environment. So we'll talk about a few different aspects, what kind of challenges China is facing in terms of environmental policy and governance. So then it's how China is governed, basically from an environment perspective. We'll talk about so to introduce China's governance system. And then we'll talk about China's government. China's government is very complicated, just like India's. And so we'll talk about is how the entire Chinese governance system got mobilized for environmental protection. Then it's because China is also experiencing quite a lot of challenges in policy making. We'll talk about these challenges in policy making and how China can or has been or has not been overcoming these challenges. Now, so it's again, so as a developing country, China is suffering from policy enforcement. And I'll talk about how this enforcement is done in Chinese context. And finally, I conclude about this ghost-centered governance model that China has been engaged into. So first one is by introduction. So it's to set up the entire research question. So China has been suffering from very severe environmental crisis in the past few decades. And this kind of crisis are kind of expected. If you read the literature, and so you'll see what kind of conditions can be good for environmental protection, and you can see that clearly China has a lot of weaknesses from these aspects. First one is China is not a democracy. If you read a lot of these literatures, so this one is a Politic Democracy Index. So it basically ranks countries from -10 to +10. India is here is very classical democracy, but China is ranked at the very bottom basically. So China is not democracy in these kind of situations, and so it's a lot of explanations when they try to expand China, understand China's environmental crisis is indeed from this perspective. So again, so another perspective is governance. So in order to tackle environmental pollution, environmental protection, then you have to have good governance. Then it seems that from this governance indicators, this one is from the World Bank. So yeah, they don't rank China high either. So this one is from minus 2.5 to positive 2.5. And the higher you go, the better the system will be. So basically, this one is China's rule of law. Especially today, we talk a lot of things about China's rule of law. China's rule of law is not ranked high. So this one is India's, this one is United States. And so China's rule of law is not ranked high, basically. So with these two very basic background, so China is not democracy and China has a weak rule of law. So then we kind of expect that China should suffer from very severe environmental crisis, especially with China's very rapid economic growth and very rapid growth of energy consumption. They kind of expect these kind of situations. But then in the past, especially in the past decade or past 15 years, something is really changing. So this one, China's environmental cleanup, we have seen many different signs showing that China's environment has gone through a very rapid cleanup process. This one was unexpected, especially if you were standing 10 years ago or 15 or 20 years ago. You wouldn't expect that time if you read news media and so this kind of situations would not be expected. But especially in the past decade, it has happened. For example, this one is urban air pollution in China. This air pollution air quality index. This is Shijiazhuang, Beijing. So this is northern China. Basically, this 2.5 has been decreasing dramatically over the past decade. This one, sulfur dioxide emissions, sulfur dioxide concentration. Well, northern China tend to be much more polluted than southern China. And so, but across the board, we saw that the trend is very clear that in most regions in China, the air pollution levels have come down. So this one is from China's monitoring stations across the country. It's really they give real-time data every hour, so it's all public. And now, for example, this one is so this one is a satellite data. So working with my students, Xiaoxi, and so we've seen that over these years from 2005 to 2019, the sulfur dioxide vertical column density has decreased dramatically. So basically, so this sulfur dioxide problem has dramatically been alleviated. So from another perspective, climate change. So we've been talking about our two countries, which are very large developing countries. We are a very large contributor to global carbon dioxide emissions. And as you see that, so the positions have changed dramatically as well in the past 2 decades. In 1997, so we come together to stand up pretty firmly on the common but differentiated responsibilities. We're saying that we are developing countries, but the carbon dioxide emissions are mainly caused by developed countries. But then in 2009, China started to have the first go on carbon mitigation, 40 to 45% reduction of carbon intensity in 2020 compared with 2005 level. So yeah, so that was China's first carbon mitigation goal. Then in 2014, there was a first absolute emission goal. The carbon dioxide emissions would peak in around 2030. And so it's also to my big surprise last September, China announced to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. So as you do see that in the past decade, a lot of things have changed. And this very rapid environmental cleanup progress has happened. But then it's very difficult to understand it. So we expect that this environmental crisis to be there because China is still not a democracy. China's governance indicators have not been ranked high either by World Bank. So then this one is how can we expand China's environmental governance? So how did China? So then the big question we have. So for this book is how did China achieve rapid economic environmental cleanup in the past decade? So basically, if you read the literature, two major ways to expand this. First one is central planning. So because that China has a very long tradition of central planning, centralized. So it's then later on, but we'll see that this one has a problem. So because China is facing a lot of challenges, and if we assume that China's entire environmental cleanup is centrally planned, then we have to assume one thing that probably is unrealistic. is somebody or these central planners must be so smart with a lot of data to support their decision making, and they have to understand the entire country so well to plan ahead. So I'll come back to this point and see that this one is very hard to understand. Is we haven't seen that China or in Beijing there are some very good central planners who have this capability and who have this much data to plan everything ahead. Then, so of course, the second one is about rule-based governance. So again, this one is this rule-based governance is what we experience, for example, in developed countries. In many developed countries, so they have a good rule of law, and so whenever they want to, for example, to have environmental protection, to reduce emissions, to pass a stringent law, then so everybody has to follow the rules. So then they'll just implement the law, and then everything will be solved. So this one, for example, if you look at how the US solve the subducted emission problems, so then they passed a few laws, especially the 1998 Clean Air Act Amendment. So then established the SRAM program, and everything got implemented well, so then it solved the problem. But in China, again, so China does not have very good rule of law. So then you also see that in China, a lot of rules and a lot of policies are not implemented well. So then we also find it very difficult to expand China's environmental cleanup with this one, this rule-based governance. So then we have this difficulties with these two central ways to expand China's performance in the past decade. Then we cannot find good explanations in this. So this is the start of this book. I've been thinking about this question for quite a long time. Sorry, from another perspective, is how does China work? So we have seen this one not just for environmental cleanup. It happens in many other sectors. We see the two things at the same time. On the one hand, you have good performance, or the macroeconomic or this data can give you pretty good performance. But on the other hand, if you get to micro level, you see a lot of problems. So we have a lot of policies they're not enacted in a very good way. So the entire process may not be good enough. A lot of policies got enacted but not implemented well. So when you have all of these problems at the macro level, but then how you can get good performance at the macro level, all the good numbers from the macro level, then it's hard to understand as well. Then we try to understand how does China work, basically. Or sometimes when China does not work. So then we come up with this theoretical understanding. We call it goal-centered governance. So basically, so China is using Go to organize its governance. So throughout this talk, I'll talk about how this goal-centered governance is applied to overcome these different challenges, and why this one is applied in China, but why central planning or rule-based governance are not actually the major way to explain what's going on in China. So the first one is how do we understand how this political will for the environment is formed. Again, China is not a democracy. And how and why did environmental protection really have rapidly claim a high priority? So because we did see that in the past decade or 15 years since the 11th Five-Year Plan, which was running from 2006 to 2010. And environmental protection has claimed a high priority among all governmental affairs. And why? Why did it happen? So, and where did this political will come from? So that's a basic thing. Because again, so under this context, in this context that China is not democracy, and how can we understand it? So basically, China's political will is very much centralized, indeed. So this one is about centralized things in China. So if you look at so the entire process of China's environmental protection, you have seen very clearly that so the top leaders, especially, for example, you have to understand the Chinese Communist Party's leadership role. So, so the Central Committee, they have about 200 plus members in this political bureau, especially standing committee, the 7-member standing committee, where, for example, the Prime Minister and also President there, Xi Jinping is there, Li Keqiang is there, so they're in the standing committee. So this one is they formed this political will. Then you do see that in the past 15 years. So basically when they place environmental protection at high priority, then the entire country will place it at high priority. But when they don't rank it high, then the entire country is not moving towards that direction. But then why? So then we try to understand why they want to care about environment, especially in the past 50 years. So if you see that, so China's environment political will has been evolving pretty rapidly. So this one gives you some information about across 3 different leaderships. In the first one, 1998-2002, that was on the leadership of President Jiang Zemin. And so that time, environment protection was not of high priority, because that time economic jobs are more important. If you look at that time, so this was a period when China was suffering from the Asian financial crisis. So you do see, for example, this is not how many jobs here. So this one is GDP growth rate. That time is about 8% a year. Compared with previous 5 years, it was pretty low. Then China had to worry a lot about jobs creation. So then you see that over that few years, the number of jobs that was created dropped to a very low level. So only 3 million non-primary jobs were created every year. So that time is environmental protection was not ranked high because some other things were still there. Some other economy was more important. That's what people wanted. So that time is when people could rank, so they would prefer to have better jobs or have jobs rather than have good environment. But then things were changed afterwards. In 2003, from 2003 to 2012, that was on the leadership of a new President Hu Jintao. So they had this, they formed this one called scientific view development. So all of these 3 representatives was ideology by that leadership on Jiang Zemin's leadership. The scientific view development, again, is not a new ideology or some kind of expression of the governance strategy under this new leadership. And so it's scientific view development really emphasized on public goods. And SARS played a very important role. It's another very sad event, sad pandemic 18 years ago. So that time because SARS played a very important to remind the governments or the leadership saying that public goods are very important for the economy as well. So then they started to pay more attention to this, and also because at that time economy started being a big problem for the country. They started to create a lot of jobs. For example, within this few years from 2003 to 2007, that was first administration under Hu Jintao. So they created close to 16 million jobs, non-primary jobs every year. Across country, then they started to worry about environment, and people are getting wealthy as well. They started to worry about environmental quality, and people started to want to design for better environment. Then they started to deliver. And after 2013, we worried about whether this newly formed political will for the environment could be sustained under the new leadership of Xi Jinping. So it's also very important that so they started to get people are getting much richer than before. So then they have this desire for better environment instead of a good economy. And of course, the economy also doing pretty well. So there's still a lot of jobs. New jobs got created. So this one, non-primary jobs, was close to about 10, 11 million jobs per year. So that time, if you go through the entire history in the past 2 or 3 decades, you see that a lot of things have changed, and you do see that heavy involvement of Chinese central leadership. But then we also want to try to understand is why this one. So they respond to this to what people wanted. Again, so it's because in China the legitimacy of the government is not reflected by election; it's reflected by the performance. So especially in the past, economic developments or job creation were very important to provide legitimacy of the government, and especially in the past decades. So when people started to get, they started to pay more attention to good environment than they wanted. So then this environmental cleanup has been a very important source for the government's legitimacy. So that's another very important reason why they started to care more about environment, started to pay place environmental protection at a very high priority among all governmental affairs. So then this one, then when leadership and top central leadership changes and started to prioritize environmental protection, then entire country started to move forward. But that's just the central leadership. But if you try to understand it, so China's entire thing. So what's that? Okay, so yeah, so for another one, so we have to understand how China is governed. So this is just the central leadership. So we have not gone into implementation doing the dirty work. So then we have to understand how China is governed. Again, China has not established standard of law. So then we try to understand is so what's basically courts are not that important in China's environmental protection. Then how is China's government structured? So and especially we try to understand is whether China's environmental governance is centralized or decentralized. We'll get back to this point a lot, to whether it's a centralized or it's basically central planning, or it's a decentralized, then it's entirely opposite to central planning. So how these two got entangled in this entire process. First one is so basic structure of China's environmental governance. So China's government has basically 4 different levels: the central government, provincial government, municipality or prefecture level, and the county level government. So if you look at their composition of their personnel, then you can see they clearly have a division of labor. For example, in the central government. So this one is the central government in terms of, so basically for the entire country, there are 4 different categories when I hire this environmental officials. So basically administration, that's the Environment Bureau or Ministry of Environmental Protection, Ministry of Ecology and Environment, basic countries. Then you have this inspection bureau, you have monitoring bureaus, and also others. These are just many of those researchers who provide support for their policy making. Then at the central level, you can see that so about 70, close or 2/3 of the personnel actually are in the central government. They work in others, which means they are researchers. So in the central government, basically, because the central government is very much at the head of the entire government, they provide they enact policies. And so in the policy making, they really require quite a lot of intellectual support. So a lot of researchers are there in the central government and help them make this different policy to assess, to evaluate different policies. They also have, for example, since the past decade, also strengthened in this inspection. But this inspection and later on those inspections are very different at the lower level government. So for the central government, inspections are many to check the jobs of lower level governments. But so they also check other polluters, but they still check these polluters, they want to check the performance of this lower level governments. And also provincial level, you see that these others, again, researchers, they take about half of the entire environmental officials. But if you look at, especially in the county level government, so this section has been very small. So most of the people working in the county level governments are working in administration, which means environmental protection bureaus, and they do site inspections, and also they go to monitor this air quality. They go monitor the emission levels of different polluters. So across these 4 different levels, the central government basically is in charge of making policy, but policy implementation are very much in the hands of municipality and county level governments. Provincial governments, they also have quite a lot of roles in policy making. They also have a very in-depth capacity to make policies. So yeah, so this we have seen that there's huge, especially if you compare with the federal states, and you see a clear difference. In China, so the central governments have to rely on county level governments or these lower level governments. They have very distinct division of labor within the government. So then we see that China's policy making is also very much decentralized. So one thing is because China's laws, especially environmental laws, they are slow. They're very slow to enact. They're very slow to do amendments, and they are intentionally vague. And it's just the stated principles. It's very difficult to get implemented directly. But China's policies are very quick to enact. So it takes half a year, 1 year to pass a new policy. If one policy is not enough, they're going to pass another policy. So these policies are much quicker. So they're much more specific and they are very much implementable. So a lot of these different entities, for example, state council, ministries, and internal departments, and many local governments as well, provincial governments, and also municipality governments, they can actually make policies that can be applied directly within their own jurisdiction. So again, another one is because China's weak rule of law, this also enables China to have this decentralized policy making. For example, if you compare with federal state like in the US, the Congress can make a law. They can have a lot of time to debate a law and make law applicable to the entire country. But in China's case, these policies have very much a decentralized policy making process. And even though that central government is indeed also very important in the policy making, but a lot of other provincial and other local governments and the different ministries, different departments, they're also very active in policy making, not just the National People's Congress. National People's Congress is in charge of lawmaking, but from the day-to-day policy, they are not active. Not only so, if you see that China also has very much decentralized policy implementation. We just saw that in the Chinese central government is very much they're in charge of policy making, but not policy implementation. And from this, the total number of personnel that work in different levels of governments, as you can see that most environmental officials in China, they're in local governments, they're municipality and county level governments. The central government is pretty small. And so central government has no capability of implementing numerous policies and laws in China, because we are talking about millions of different polluters across the entire country. And for the central government, it's just not possible with the entire Ministry of Ecology and Environment. They only have a few hundred people there. So then it's just not possible for them to implement policies in the country. And they have to rely on local governments to do the job. So which means the central governments and local governments, the entire government system must be mobilized to do the job. Otherwise, this policy making implementation will not be smooth. So then you will not be able to have a very serious environmental protection. Well, you see that policy, this fiscal expenditure is also very much decentralized, which means the Chinese local governments actually they spend most of the money that is spent by the Chinese government. For example, you can see again this one compares China and India. You see that this one is China's the central government's share in expenditure. China's central government spends about 15% of all governmental expenditures. 85% of the governmental expenditures in China happen in local governments. But the central government actually has about half of total revenue for the entire governmental system. So which means the central government is in the big fiscal surplus, while the local governments are in the big fiscal deficit. So which means a lot of money will be transferred from the central government to local governments. That's very crucial because some provinces are much poorer than others. Rich provinces, they can take care of themselves, but poorer provinces, they need this fiscal transfer to back up their environmental enforcement capacity. Otherwise, they don't have the capacity and resources to implement these policies. And so throughout this thing, so basically the central government and the local governments really they have to work together to do this. And local governments they also have the resources because they're in charge of most of the governmental expenditures in China. They have the resources to do the job, to do the implementation job. Again, so this 15%, which means the Chinese central government is not in charge of implementation, because that's where most money goes spent. Again, if you compare with China and India, that's I find it's pretty interesting. So India's central government, from this perspective, is much more powerful than the Chinese central government in terms of implementation. So from the revenue perspective or from expenditure perspective, especially from expenditure perspective, the Indian central government spends much more in terms of share than China's central government does. So which means and China and India really have very different structures in organizing its governments. So again, so the Chinese local government really have the capacity to do this. And from the environmental perspective, again, so this one shows you who spent most of the money. So the blue part shows for different governmental affairs. So you see that national defense or foreign affairs. So this one shows you the share of the central government. So for these two business, that's the central government's job. So they spend most of the money on these two items are spent by central government. But environmental protection, that's a local affair. So most of the money spent for environmental protection actually is spent by local governments. And for others, some of these things are very much local. Some of this is central local shared business. Again, so the local governments, they have this capacity to do this, and also they have this duty to implement this policy, while the central government is in charge of policy making, but they don't have the capacity to enforce these policies. So then, which means that both central and local governments, they must collaborate, they must be mobilized together before anything can happen in China. And again, but that's a very big problem, because in China's settings, this again, rule of law has not been well established, which means the courts cannot play very important roles to enforce these policies from the central government can be applied, can be implemented at local level. So that's another quite important challenge we're going to face. But so the central government does have a lot of control, can have a lot of control over local governments. One is especially due to its personnel management. So because especially the party, the Communist Party, and so they play very important roles in managing human resources, especially through its Department of Organization. So there was a very major reform in 1984. So before that, so the central government controls actually two levels of officials. So the central government was responsible for appointing provincial and municipality level leaders. But so which means the municipality leaders, they did not have to listen to provincial leaders, because their jobs were not in the hands of provincial leaders. They didn't have to listen to those guys. But afterwards, after very major reform, so then the municipality leaders, they have to listen to what the provincial leaders are saying, because at that time is afterwards, after the reform, each level manages on one lower level, which means the central government manages the provincial leaders, and provincial leaders will manage those municipality leaders. So then this one becomes a very important way for the central government to really control local governments. It's not through courts, but through this personnel, this appointment control. We'll get back to this to understand that how this has been playing a role to mobilize the local governments. And to mobilize the entire Chinese government, of course, again, so they're not important in China's environmental protection. But in the background of this centralized and decentralized environmental governance, especially how can we mobilize the entire Chinese government for environmental protection? And especially we're focused on goals and how this goals got applied in China, and so then how they have been playing active roles to mobilize the entire Chinese government from the central all the way to the local level governments. So China's goal setting is very centralized. So India also had 5-year plans. China still has 5-year plans. Currently, so especially this week is very important for China's 14th 5-year plan. In Beijing, they have a conference there to decide what kind of things will be written into the 14th 5-year plan. In the 14th 5-year plan, or in any 5-year plans, just one page that's always all the numbers. That's the most important page that contains all the national goals. So these goals are very much centrally decided, centrally set, and so especially by the top leadership that decides the direction of the country. And then after these national goals are set, and these goals will be distributed across the entire country from national level to provincial level. Then provincial and different provinces, they have the authority to decide how they allocate their own goals among their own municipalities. And the municipalities, again, they also have their own authority to decide how they're going to assign these goals to different counties. But then, so this one is even the goal setting is very much centralized. But this goal distribution, so they have for these different local governments, different levels of local governments, they have their own authority to decide how they're going to allocate their own goals. So basically, the central government is only going to monitor the performance of provincial level governments, and the provincial level governments will hold those municipal governments accountable, and so this one will penetrate to the very low levels of the local governments. So again, so this goal attainment in China is even though that there's a national goal there, for example, for environmental protection or for climate change, for carbon neutrality, but this goal attainment is very much decentralized. This national government is mainly in charge of supervising the goal attainment process and punish or reward those local governments who have achieved this goal or who cannot achieve this goal. Basically, set up very clear criteria for goal attainment. What kind of situation can be called goal attainment? So basically, I have a lot of numbers here. So a lot of things are very much numerical. So a lot of KPIs, so they have to really earn marks, just like students earning marks. There's local government leaders also have to earn marks in there. So then have to account for this goal attainment. Then after, but afterwards, of course, there will be some incentive, very strong incentives for if they attain the goal, they have greater promotion opportunities. So this one is the most important incentive for local government leaders to work for goals that are assigned or distributed from the central government and from provincial to municipal government either. Then direct intervention is getting diminished because a lot of these Chinese authorities, the government authorities, has been decentralized. So the central government is playing a basically indirect role here in the intervention. So basically they give local governments a lot of autonomy, a lot of authorities, a lot of resources to do their job. But of course, if they don't do their job, if they don't attain the goals, they will be punished. So local leaders will lose opportunities, get promoted, and they can be removed from important position, power positions to another less important positions. And fiscal transfer has not been quite important here so far, but it can potentially become a very important role, can play a very important role in make sure that local governments can attain the goals, because we're saying that the central government does transfer quite a lot of resources from its own budget to local governments. Then through that way, there's an incentive there. But so far, this one has not been as important as promotion opportunities. So promotion opportunities is most important incentive that we can explain why local government leaders, they want or they do not want to work for goal attainment or for some specific goals. So if this goal is connected with promotion, they will work hard for it. If this goal is less important in the priority, so they have a lower priority, then they're not going to work hard for it. So this goal is also changing according to different situations. For example, in the 11th Five Plan, China started to have a national goal on sulphur dioxide emission. That was the first national goal in the National 5-Year Plan on sulphur dioxide emissions. So the answer is so far I have seen that this one is sulphur dioxide concentration in Shijiazhuang, the capital city of Hebei province, one of the dirtiest provinces in China in terms of air quality. But since having improved again dramatically over the past decade, you see that sulphur dioxide concentration has been decreasing. Then they started to after sulphur dioxide has been this problem has been alleviating. Then they started to evolve to another goal, PM25, that contain many different pollutants. Then, so in the 13th Five Plan, they started to focus on AQI, air quality index, because the sulfur dioxide has stopped being a major pollutant, and the PM25 is very important, but ozone is getting more and more important in China's air quality index. So yeah, so they have been using this composite index, air quality index, to manage the air quality as a whole. So yeah, so this goals can evolve according to the situations, and so then another one is also about data quality. For example, in the 11th Five Plan, they focus on the absolute emissions. So there are a lot of cheating going on with the absolute emissions coming out of local governments. We'll get back to this, so it's actually very difficult to know exactly how many emissions have happened from individual polluters. But to measure air quality is so much easier. So then started to pay more attention to air quality, and air quality data are much more difficult to get manipulated. So then with this better data quality, so the central government or provincial level governments, it can better manage or assess the goal attainment of the local level governments. So this way, then they can make sure that whenever the central government is serious about it, they issue the incentives to local governments and make sure that local governments will work hard for it. If they don't, there will be penalties on their promotion opportunities. But then, so it's after China's entire government is mobilized, because then the local governments they can be serious about policy implementation, and central government or different levels of governments are very serious about policy making as well. But China is still suffering from very severe challenges in policy making. For example, so we have basically three major challenges in policy making. So a lot of research has been done for different aspects. First one is for individual policies. So to make a good policy is not easy. You need a lot of research, especially 15 years ago when China's lot of research has not been done in great depth. So when they make a policy, the quality of individual policies may not have been supported with good research, then the quality of policy making could be compromised. Another one is the choice of effective and efficient policy instruments. Again, so to understand it, it's actually pretty difficult, and especially in the Chinese context, how this thing can be done. How can we choose what kind of policy instrument we should choose to tackle a specific problem and to make sure that it's efficient and also effective? It's also very difficult in the Chinese context. But anyway, so for China, there are a lot of different policies, and the coordination of different policies is also a big problem. How you can make sure that when you enact a policy, you have thought through everything. Make sure that everything is coordinated well. We have so many, hundreds of different policies. How you can make sure that the different policies that don't have conflicts, only have synergies. But in reality, you see that a lot of policies, they conflict with each other. They actually have detrimental impacts on each other. So with these challenges, how can you deal with this? Especially for solving some very serious environmental goals, environmental protection goals, then actually you need quite a lot of different activity, different policy to solve this. For example, this one shows the sort of mitigation. You have to tackle the economy, the scale. So, for example, tackle the energy issues and transition problems, and you have to deal with its subscribers. A lot of things, a lot of policies have to be in place. Good policy have to be coordinated well in order to achieve this. But China's policy making indeed has these barriers, and it's very difficult to really overcome that. So then we'll talk about this goal-centered policy supply. So China's entire policy supply argument is goal-centered. So basically, there are two enabling conditions. One is entire goal attainment is very much decentralized. So those local governments, they need policies. They can create very strong demand for policies. But the central government, for example, upper level central government, when they evaluate the performance of provincial governments, they don't really care about what kind of policies they choose, what kind of policy they implement. They only care about outcome, and many care about whether this goal or that goal has been attained or not. They don't care that much about which path they took and which policy they have adopted. And then, so the local level governments also have the authority and the means to make policy. Policy supply is very much decentralized as well. So because of China's weaker rule of law, they're more tolerant to policy mistakes. So they can freely try all kinds of policy instruments. If some policies fail dramatically, it's fine. They just make another policy. But as long as these different policies will work towards a goal attainment, that'll be fine. So for the central government, they have imposed a very significant flexibility on different policy paths for achieving the goals. So then this one is, so they want to assess what kind of policies are needed there within their own jurisdiction to achieve the goal. They can decide this. So policy supply and policy demand are very much decentralized and towards the goal. And so then in order to overcome the challenges, as we discussed just now, is so this required policy evolution by implementation and selection. So basically in China, so these policies are not, so they don't care that much about a policy mistake. They're more tolerant to policy mistakes. In the sense, because there's no centralized control policy supply. There are many different policy makers. So they're roughly independent authority. They can make policies because now they are under very high pressure to achieve some mitigation goals or to achieve some goals that can improve air quality. Then they have to engage themselves into very active policy adoption, policy innovation, and they have to learn actively from other regions. Then, so to see whether they have got some new policy that may be adopted in their own jurisdiction. So then, so when after they got so many policies, again, so we have this policy interaction, may have conflicts across different policies. Then the policies and policy, they have to compete with each other. There's a very fierce policy competition with each other. So only those fit policies that can help them achieve the goal or can help them move closer to the goal can survive. So through this process, basically, they don't have to worry this much about making a good policy at the very beginning. But of course, they're still trying to make better policy from the beginning. But the requirement for making a great policy from the very beginning and making sure that it works in the next decade, so this requirement has been much better, much alleviated. Because through this policy implementation selection, only those fit policies can survive, can be adopted, can be expanded to become national policies, can also be adopted in other regions as well. Another challenge is about enforcing environmental policies. Again, so in the Chinese context as a developing country, so there are a lot of problems about how these different policies got implemented. Cheating happens all the time. For example, the ministry, this one is the Ministry of Ecology and Environment. They also publish this different data by different local governments, also by different polluters. They cheat the government or upper level government on what kind of air quality, what kind of emissions they have. So it's this kind of things not uncommon in China. This also have been recognized by different levels of governments have been addressed this. And so then, but without addressing this problem, without the capability to have very effective policy enforcement, then environmental cleanup cannot happen either. So then we get into the to understand is how this policy implementation is done in China, also called as goal-centered policy implementation. So this one is basically adopted this economic theory of crime and punishment. So there's basically, they said there's a few conditions that can be favourable for compliance. So the first one is the compliance costs are low, so which means it's cheaper for them to really comply with the law. And another one is the penalty is high. If they engage in non-compliance, if they get caught, the penalty will be high. And also they should have a higher probability of catching non-compliance. And so in order to achieve this, you have to make sure there's favorable conditions are there. It's not straightforward. So in the past decade, China did not make sure that different policy implementation capacities or these schemes are rated before they enact new policies. So this entire policy implementation improvement was very gradual, very much goal-centered. They said so if I work on this, for example, higher penalty, that's more effective to achieve better goal attainment. I'm going forward towards this direction. If another factor is more important that can help me better or go with another direction. So they don't, even if these policies are not implemented well, then they're fine. As long as this policy implementation get improved to get closer to their goal attainment. So there's a lot of these penalties got applied in China, especially this one. So in 2014, there was this new amendment of environmental protection law in China had a very big increase of the possible fines that the environmental officials can impose on polluters. So before that, they called every event, every non-compliance event, you can impose one penalty. But afterwards, they said as you can. So if, for example, this event can happen continuously for half a year, let's say. So in the past, they can only impose a fine. That's it, only once. But afterwards, you can impose a daily fine for that half a year. So that can substantially increase the total amount of fines that can be imposed on those polluters. So that has also been a quite important impact to change polluters' non-compliance behavior. Another one, but still not that important, is criminal charges. So now they can put those polluters, especially if they are non-compliant, they can be put into jail. But this one has not been that significant so far. But these fines have become quite important. So financial penalties are still pretty important to raise the penalty levels on those non-compliance. Then with the non-compliance, because this one is much easier than catch non-compliance. So that was done first. Another one is they increase the resources for catching non-compliance. So this one basically shows that the number of people working for inspection in China has been increasing. So this data shows from 2004 to 2015 has been increasing a little bit. And also especially for, so this one is the share of inspection for the central government, and so it has been increasing relatively. So this increase also has been helping policy implementation. They can catch a higher probability, higher share of non-compliance cases. That can also make sure that those polluters have to think twice if they get caught, and now they have a higher probability of being caught. And especially, another quite important thing is they try to reform the environmental compliance monitoring, but because this one is the most challenging part. To raise penalty is easiest, and to increase the number of people working on inspection, that's also relatively easier. But to reform the environmental compliance monitoring is the most difficult part. So it's because a lot of people's interest will be affected. And so but you see that in the past decades, a lot of data got so now available. So a lot of real-time data got available there. I'll show you this these are all real-time data that can show you this. Probably I can show you this. So this is so now we're showing this. So this one is China's every incinerator. So basically, for example, across the entire China, all the incinerators, you just click any one of this. So then they have all the data there. For example, this one has started running for that time, but if you see, this one started running. No, so which means, for example, this one shows this incinerator was not operating. So for that time, but if you go there, for example, on this day it was running. So they basically measure all the pollutant concentration levels, and this one is the temperature, because for incinerator dioxin generation is very much related to the temperature in combustion. They make sure that they can monitor this and publish all the data online so people can check. So we also have all these different polluters. For example, this is how many polluters there, how many monitoring stations from this different polluters. Just check, and so it's all the data there. You can just basically click into this. For example, they have all the polluters. You can check their real-time data. And so the country has a lot of data there. Let me get through this. So then with the big data. So it's a lot of this, and they try to merge big data into the compliance monitoring system. Now, so it's getting, so the probability of catching non-compliance has been much higher than before with the help of different technologies, which means they don't have to increase the number of people working for inspection that much. So now the people, so these individual inspectors, so their inspection can be more targeted. So with the help of this new system. So basically with the help with these different reforms in the past decade, we also expect that we've seen that China's environmental non-compliance has been very much alleviated. So nowadays it's very rare. These guys still non-compliant, and because they also publish non-compliance cases. They punish those guys who still cheat very severely. So if they are local government officials, they have to lose their jobs. if they're managers of the state-owned enterprises, they're going to lose their jobs as well. So anyway, so that's a final slide of this presentation. Just to give a very brief conclusion. So we're saying that so central planning cannot explain China's situation very well because there's so many challenges in policy making, in mobilizing the government, in policy implementation. Nobody in the Chinese government is this smart, can have this much data to support its decision making. And again, China is not rule-based governance, so we cannot use that model to explain China's environmental governance either. So if we can, but we can use a goal-centered governance model to explain what's going on in China, to explain why they have experienced environmental cleanup, especially in the past decade. So with this goal-centered governance, and so not all goals are important, because this one is this very important feature of this goal-centered governance, because only a few goals can be prioritized. If every goal is so important, then which means it cannot fire this many officials at the same time. If everybody cannot comply, cannot attain the goal, then this goal system will not be useful because you cannot fire all the provincial governments at the same time. So it really depends on whether this goal, environment goal, is prioritized in the Chinese government affairs or not. And so this policy making, we have seen that is very active, and each one contributes only incrementally to the goal attainment. But when you have a lot of policies got enacted and it contributes to put all of these things together, they have cumulative impacts on goal attainment. So we also at the same time see a lot of policies fail. But this one is a inherent feature of this goal-centered governance. We have a lot of policies, and different policies got tried in reality implementation. And only those policies got implemented well can survive, can be expanded, so then can work for goal attainment further. And also for this one, so again, goal coordination, the requirement on goal coordination is also lower. Because for this one, for example, so different local governments, you have to think about their own ways. You don't need a centralized authority to really make sure that different things got coordinated well before things can happen. And also from this perspective is because they focus on goals instead of all the detailed actions of different local governments. So it's not, so this from a central planning perspective, it's not like that. Because the central government doesn't really care. So what kind of actions have been taken by local level governments? They may care about this few numbers, but whether these goals can be obtained or not. So then this one can minimize the moral hazards of local governments, so they don't have to use the excuses. So the most important job for them to do is make sure that these numbers got achieved. This on different goals on emission mitigation, on air quality improvement, on carbon mitigation as well. And that's basically the entire presentation. Finally, I want to make a short advertisement for our program as well. So we have, especially for this Hong Kong PhD fellowship scheme. So it's actually a pretty generous scheme. We really want to have more applicants from India, especially from ITB, to come here to do a PhD. It's well funded. It's a fully funded scholarship. So CHK is actually ranked pretty decently in the world. Our department, Geography and Resource Management, also pretty decently ranked. So if you have any students who are interested in coming to study in Hong Kong, you're most welcome. Thank you very much. That's it for this presentation. I'm not sure we have.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Yuan.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much. Do we have questions?
Yeah, so we have a few questions here already. I want to request all the participants to please message their questions to me. I'll put it up for Professor Yuan. Meanwhile, I'll read out the questions which I've already received. So the first question which I would like to read out is from Prashant from NCAR, Colorado. So he says methane from agriculture is one of the dominant greenhouse gases. What are the mitigation strategies or policies in China to control methane emissions. Do these policies impact the food production?
Well, so I don't know much about it, but methane, of course, from agriculture is quite important. As well. So again, so in the Chinese context, so we haven't got the final 14th Five-Year Plan document yet, but it's coming out in the next week. Now we will see that how this got played out, and so that's part of the local government's goal system. So this carbon dioxide mitigation goal has been imposed on local level governments. So agriculture is one of the sectors that is covered, and methane emissions is also part of that. So it of course depends on individual situations in this context.
Okay, so yeah, thank you, sir. So next question is from Avinash. Is China's target on coal realistic? Especially because there is an increase on that in the past 2-3 years.
On coal, right?
Yeah, coal.
Well, so it's for coal is so in the past, especially in the past 8 years, we have seen that coal consumption in China has been quite stable. So it's, especially if you compare with the previous decade, coal consumption increased dramatically. From 2003 to 2013, basically. So basic China's coal consumption increased in a very fast way. That was also one of the reasons why China's carbon dioxide emissions increased very fast. So I don't quite get it. So what kind of specific goal you're talking about on coal?
Okay.
So what kind of specific goal?
Maybe Shiva, you can ask Avinash to speak. You can unmute him.
Okay. Avinash. I don't
Avinash,
know
are
if
you
he's
there?
there online, if he's there. But anyway, he has posted another question, which I'll speak out. Why was the domestic pilot carbon trading system in China shelved?
Was there were 7 pilot schemes, and actually last year in December, on December 31st, the Ministry of Ecology and Environment, they published a national carbon emission trading plan to include many most of the major emitters of carbon dioxide. It has not been shelved. It's coming up with a national emission trading market instead of pilot schemes. Of course, a lot of challenge again. So for this one, in our research, we also look at whether this one is important or not in terms of China's carbon dioxide mitigation policy. We will still see that China has so many other policies there to control carbon dioxide emissions. The emission trading market, the national emission trading market, is just one out of many. So these different policies, they also have to compete with each other to see which one is more effective. And just a few words more about this coal. So China has been also got this coal as well. So they have imposed goals on local governments to control their coal consumption. That has also been playing a very major role. For example, to control the total emissions of air pollutants and also carbon dioxide. That's also been playing a very active role to push for energy transition towards renewables.
Okay. So the next question is from Metrika. So if we look into governance at a local level, you talked about incentives such as promotion opportunities, but I'm unsure if that system might work in India. What other kinds of incentives do you think works for local level policy compliance and success? Say if we talk about climate policy.
Well, indeed, this one is very special in the Chinese context. I understand in India, and for example, in the US, this one just cannot work. For example, the Prime Minister of India, I guess, cannot fire a state governor, a state first minister, right? So easily. But it's because they're elected. But in China's context, it's different, right? So those French government, they can appoint basically those provincial leaders. Then they can also fire them. So we have seen these situations a lot. If they, so a lot of research have proved that this system is working, has been applied, and has been playing real roles to link the performance and promotion opportunities with the job performance, basically the KPIs of those governments. So this one is indeed very difficult to get applied in India. But one possible thing, but again, so not only about fiscal relationship. So in China's context, the central government is richer than local governments, because central government does not spend much money, but earns half of the total revenue. So there's a lot of money got transferred from central government to local governments. So that's another means for the central government to control, to incentivize, and also to make sure that those poorer provinces, they don't have to lag behind that much. Again, so this one is also quite different in Indian context. India is, so the central government spend more money than the Chinese central government does in terms of total fiscal structure. So actually, I don't know how things can work. So I'm quite interested in understanding how these things can work. So we can compare these two very important countries and see that how things can work in their different contexts. Then probably we can get a better understanding how we can make things happen in such complicated situations.
So next question is from Bhavna. What is the role of public sphere in formulation of air pollution mitigation strategies in China?
What do you mean by public sphere? The institutions?
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
So basically, if you look at it, within the central government, for example, the Academy of Environmental Science and the Academy of Environmental Planning, so all these different research institutes, they have been playing very major roles in writing the policy. Actually, they're also quite important in writing all the environmental laws, the standards. And also the university professors, they also very actively got engaged in writing those standards, and so they have to rely on those studies to come out of this policy. And so that central government, provincial government, the same thing. They also have their own supporting team from environmental science, from planning, from public policy, and also from their own universities there. So the public institutions, indeed, the public sphere, again, so from this perspective, they have been playing a very important role to support policy making in China. So this is also has been seen. You can also see in the past 15 years. So this policy, for the quality of individual policies, have been better, and so these policies have also got better assessed. So they also assess with whether this policy instrument works or does not work. So then help to get this knowledge and to guide those local governments and also central governments to make better policy and to select the proper policy instruments for solving their own problems and also for attaining their own specific goals.
Right, sir. So next question is from Swati. How does prioritization of policies occur in China? Who decides it? Are the local governments and communities involved in the process?
So basically, China's civil society has been much underdeveloped than India's. So from this perspective, so a lot of these policies is even within central, provincial, and local governments. Still, the public institutions play very major roles there. The NGOs they're getting more active. NGOs, especially environmental NGOs, is most developed area among all NGOs in China. So they're also being quite active in pushing policy changes, especially, for example, they also so they can also propose different goals, different policies, and they can also supervise, especially because when we have a lot of data, this data are all public. So there are a lot of NGOs, for example, they check the data constantly. So some of this data I showed you is, for example, IPE is NGO, it's a think tank, it's private sector in a sense, and so they help supervise, they monitor the performance of local governments and also those polluters. Then report these non-compliance cases to the government and also check whether those non-compliance cases have been addressed or not. If they're not addressed, then they're going to really make this one become a scandal, and then it can affect the local officials' promotion opportunities. That's all about their performance there.
Sir, that earlier question on coal. So Avinash has messaged that his question was on carbon neutrality target 2030.
So carbon neutrality was not for 2030. So China's goal for 2030 was to have peak emissions. Then in 30 years, China wanted to achieve carbon neutrality. Frankly speaking, I was very surprised last September when China announced this goal. But this one is again. So this is what happened in China. So when the Chinese central government, especially top leadership, Xi Jinping, when he announced this goal, of course, there's some research has been going on there, including some friends, for example, we are also working on this to how we can achieve carbon neutrality. Then they have their models and give some confidence to the leadership that this one might be feasible. But actually, they don't have a very concrete plan on how to achieve that. So this one has happened not only for carbon neutrality, also but for previously for about environmental cleanup as well. But they have some idea that this one might work. Then they rely on bottom-up entities like local governments, and this market to really come out of solutions, kind of different policies to innovate different technologies and to achieve this goal. So from this perspective, so we haven't seen a concrete plan, and we don't believe there is a concrete plan there. So because if you think about it, we are now in 2021 to achieve carbon neutrality in 2060. We're still 40 years away. Nobody can make such a good plan that can work in the next 40 years. There's no way with this much complicated situations. So basically, so we expect it to still be a goal-centered process there. So in this 14th Five Plan, there will be a carbon mitigation goal, and they'll also be distributed across different provinces. And so they rely on these different provinces to really come out with these different innovations, think about different ways how can they achieve that.
Right, sir. So I think we have two more questions only. This one is from Narayanan. What are the reasons for the huge reductions in carbon emissions as per your data?
Say it again.
What are the reasons for the huge reductions in carbon emissions as per your data?
No, carbon emissions have not come down. So China has not achieved peak emissions so far. So the numbers I show, I guess, want to understand. So that was for environment, for air pollution. Air pollution has improved, but not for carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide, China still has a long way to go. For example, this one, right? So this one is for sulfur dioxide, and this one is for air pollutants, not for carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is still, so China has not even peaked. But of course, in the past few years, we have seen that some good signs are there. At least the growth rate has been much slower than before. So this is why China's carbon dioxide emissions is pretty stable at 28% of global emissions, which is really big. So the challenge is huge. But so far, so they want to achieve the peak emission first before they can bend the curve down to achieve carbon neutrality.
So we'll take the last question now. This is from Rishabh. He says, thank you very much for your kind words and wonderful presentation, Professor Yuan. His question is, so for a democratic polity like India, there is a continuous conflict between economic development and sustainable growth. So how does one deal with this issue? How does growth and environment go hand in hand?
So for example, so 20 years ago, we just also have seen that, for example, I guess this one. So that time is when China's, especially after the Asian financial crisis, China's economy suffered a lot because there were not enough jobs can be created. So there was quite a lot of unemployment there. So indeed, that time economic development was prioritized. Environmental protection was not. Okay. So that was indeed a conflict. But it's one of the reasons. So especially in the recent decade, one of the reasons why Chinese government, especially the top leadership, prioritized environment protection is so one of the reasons because environment protection actually can create a lot of jobs, can create a lot of economic outputs. So, for example, from one perspective, is we saw that a lot of this air pollution problems has been alleviated. So that creates a very large market actually for environmental industries. So China has created a very large industry to tackle the air pollution control, to provide the facilities, equipments, and knowledge to really reduce emissions. And for carbon mitigation, there's also a very large market. The same thing goes for India as well. India has a lot of solar and wind, has 100 gigawatt of wind and solar. That's actually a very huge market. So in China as well, China now has about 500 gigawatt of wind and solar. So that's so it's a few million, about 3 or 4 million people working in this. No, it's about 3 million people working in solar and wind industries in China. So this one, especially in the recent decade, so economic development and environment protection, they don't have to really conflict with each other, even though that in the past indeed can be conflicting with each other. But in the past decade, we have seen that these two can have synergies. When you tackle one, you can create new opportunities for innovation, for new industries, for new jobs. So with this, for example, with more than 3 million people working in renewable energy industry, that's comparable with those people working, for example, in oil industry or coal industry. So they become very important political force to make sure that China will continue to pay attention to environmental protection and also for carbon mitigation, because that's not only for public good, that's also for economic gains.
So that was the last question, sir.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much.
Professor Parthasarathy?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask maybe one last time, you can just find out if anyone else has any question.
Yeah, I'll try.
And then we can.
Yeah, so I request the participants to post if they have any more questions. Yeah, I think we are done with the questions.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Shiva, and thank you.
Thank you,
Yuan Xu, for a wonderful talk.
So I have a request. We need to take a picture.
Okay.
For the newsletter and for our social media pages.
Okay, so you want people to, how do you do that? Give instructions.
First, I'll just take back the control from.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah. Raj sir, I'm sorry. How do I remove this poster so that all of you can, like, your videos will come out nicely?
I think you have to unshare or something.
I think in that case, you have to unshare this.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying. Why can't I?
Let it share. For example, the poster also be there.
Maybe Professor has to unshare, no? Or you have done this.
I got it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So Vimal sir, is he there? Okay, I'll just take a photo just like that.
So I request all the participants maybe to switch on their camera.
Yeah, please.
For a few minutes. Yeah, while you're switching on, maybe I can just say a few things.
Sorry, sir.
I can share a few words while you're switching.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please. Please go ahead. Yes, sir.
I would like to thank Professor Yuan Xu for a wonderful talk. It's generally we know that policies play a very important role in addressing climate challenges, and we also know, therefore, that both interdisciplinary research and strategic knowledge production is very important for effective policies. However, we do not as yet have a lot of in-depth country-specific or region-specific studies that can help us understand the relationship between democracy, devolution, policy making, implementation, and the role that strategic knowledge plays in effective policy making and implementation. I particularly like Professor Xu's concept of environmental political will, because from Professor Amartya Sen, whom many of you will know, often talks about how politicization is not just the way in which it is conventionally understood, but issues like education or environment need to become political issues so that they effectively listen to concerns that come from civil society and from people. And so you very effectively pointed out how even in the absence of civil society, there is a particular kind of political will that operates. And ultimately, I think democracy is about accountability, and we need to find out what are the different ways in which political leaders can be held accountable for meeting social objectives, in this case, climate change objectives. So, I mean, it's a very complex topic that he took up, and it's a very large country that he was dealing with, but I think it was both comprehensive and coherent at the same time. I'm sure we all benefited greatly from this talk. So thank you, Professor Xu, for inaugurating this series. Thank you to your assistant, Ms. Tiffany, also for facilitating the organization of this event, and all your colleagues. Thanks very much to our convener, Professor Suvimal Ghosh, who facilitated this talk and readily agreed to this particular webinar series. And so hopefully we'll take it forward from there. Please, we'll keep you informed about the future talks. The next one will be by faculty from IIT Bombay, probably from the Energy Science Department on policy-related issues. We'd also like to thank our seminar coordinator, Professor Raj Ramsankaran. So he must have realized that organizing webinar online is much more time-consuming and difficult than organizing a physical seminar, because he's been doing this for several years. So thanks very much for all your efforts. I know it took a lot of time and effort to put this together, and thanks especially to Ms. Shiba, who's been spending a lot of hours over the last couple of weeks, especially to organize this seminar and make sure it happens without glitches. Finally, thanks to all the IDP climate studies office staff and students who have also been helping in various ways. And thank you very much to all the participants who attended today's webinar, and all of those who asked extremely interesting questions, which tells us that this is a topic that engages a lot of us, and we're all reflecting on issues related to climate policy from the perspective of development, evolution, and political will for ensuring that there is accountability in addressing sustainability challenges. Thank you very much to all of you. And
Professor, actually,
this is the point where we normally tell you to come for tea and biscuits and samosas. We are not able to do that, but hopefully in the not very distant future, we will resume physical seminars. Till then, we wish you all well, and we hope you'll be back for future webinars. We, like Professor Yuan Xu mentioned at the end of his presentation, he would welcome more collaboration with his department, himself and his colleagues, and he would welcome PhD applications. And therefore, we hope that this webinar is not just a one-time affair where you come and listen to the talk and go back, but maybe it will foster collaboration among many of us also. So we welcome any of you who are interested in contacting us, either to know more about our academic programs or for academic or research collaboration, for training programs, capacity building. So if you would like to collaborate with us, please do get in touch with us. We'll be very happy to facilitate any kind of collaboration. As Professor Subibal Ghosh mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, our IDP in climate studies at IIT Bombay was initially sponsored under the National Action Plan on Climate Change, the National Mission on Strategic Knowledge for Climate Change. So we do have a mission to produce strategic knowledge and to have more outreach, to spread more awareness about climate change. So we welcome all kinds of the collaboration requests from any of you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Professor, thank you for organizing all these things and participating. Here, I'd like to make one announcement for all the participants. So in IDP climate studies, we are going to come up with the panel discussions on 17th and 24th March. It will be attended by eminent panelists from UNESCO, University of Michigan, and from other Indian dignitaries also, even from the DST. So it will be panel discussions. There will be no much presentation. The questions will be asked to the exam, the panel members about the climate resilient designs, as well as the scope for the climate related entrepreneurships. So climate service related entrepreneurships. So it is on schedule on 17th and 24th. The interested participants can register. Shiba will send you the link also. So thank you all for participating, and thank you, Shiba, for organizing this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Professor.
sir. Thank you, Professor Yuan.
Yeah.
And thank you all participants. Raj, sir?
Yeah.
So can you please end the meeting so that you will get the recording?
Yeah. Okay, sure. So thank you, Professor Yuan.
Thank you, Professor Yuan Xu. You are muted. Professor Xu, you're muted. You need to unmute. We can't hear
Shiba.
you.
Yeah, now again, so I was not able to unmute myself. Thank you very much.
No.
I really appreciate all the efforts, and hopefully we can keep the collaboration so into the future, and we can really build on this, and so we can really gradually move it forward. So these two countries are very important, and we have a lot of challenges, common challenges. So every challenge, a small challenge in each of our countries, actually is a very big challenge. And so we're glad to compare and to learn how we can solve these different issues in different contexts, and then we can push the research forward. Thank you very much for all the organization and all the hard efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. We'll be in touch.
Thanks.